Hello, welcome back to another episode of Robin Learns Chinese While Busy, and today we're going to be talking about mastering Chinese tones and generally developing an accurate pronunciation in any language while walking up a very steep hill somewhere in that direction.
1, 2, 3, funk it.
Alright, so you might remember this scene from the last episode. We walked until this point and then we sort of went in that direction to go and enjoy one of the best cappuccinos that San Francisco has to offer. Today, we're gonna go that way to enjoy one of my favorite spots for getting a beautiful view of this city while we talk about today's topic. Now, when I first started learning Chinese, I made a statement in one of my early episodes that I wouldn't be spending time trying to master the tones in the beginning. And honestly, I think this is true of all areas of language. When you first start learning a language, there's really no point in trying to master anything. It's just not practical. But I think especially with tones, it can even be damaging if you put too much focus on getting them right too early. Now, there are a couple of reasons for this. The first one is that, so I remember when I first started and I learned the word ni, right? It means you, ni. And I remember like seeing this tone mark and it's whatever the first or second tone. I don't even know which one is which right now. But I remember definitely realizing, okay, this is like a low pitch, like ni. Then I learned the word for hao, which is the word for good, right? Hao. So both of these clearly have this sort of like low dipping tone. So when I learned the word for hello, ni hao, I remember thinking to myself, well, the ni is ni and hao is hao. So shouldn't it be ni hao? But then when I heard the recordings, I noticed with my ears that it sounds more like ni hao, right? Ni hao. So very early on, I had this strategy where I decided to trust my ears because frankly, I think they're more reliable because I don't have any context for this language. Maybe there are different rules that change the tones, who knows? And I think that if you start out by focusing on this very, frankly, intimidating aspect of learning Chinese, A, you're going to scare yourself, and B, you're going to be so unconfident because you're going to be so aware of how wrong you might be. Or I think that when you just focus on copying, when you trust your ears, get your feet wet, and just try, you don't necessarily realize how accurate or inaccurate you might be. You just try your best to copy. And so when I hear someone say, ni hao ma, right, I just copy, ni hao ma. I don't even think about, is that one the first, second, or is it third tone? And it's been the same for everything else. So when I say 老师 or 中文, I just remember that I have to start high and then kind of dip, like 中文. So if I say like, I don't know, I could say 我的中文老师是英国人. Right, so I don't know how accurate that was, but the point is I'm just sort of remembering this rhythm. It's kind of like singing Chinese. And so far I've had very good feedback on specifically my Chinese pronunciation. We're almost there. We are very close to the top of the hill now. I'm pretty excited, but I'm not going to show you yet. Now, the second reason why this is problematic is that you don't have any linguistic context by which to learn all those rules, right? So you might be learning intricate rules about how tones change, how they work, how each individual one is pronounced at different words. Who knows? But the thing is that you don't know any words yet, and you don't have that linguistic context. Whereas now, I feel like if I learn the rule, whatever the rule is that dictates this sort of ni hao, let's say that maybe it's like this ni tone, it changes when they're back to back. That's sort of what I've guessed so far. Well, now I can say, oh, that's right, because I remember in this phrase when this happens and this happens. So the point is now I have context, and that's going to help to assimilate and internalize all the rules I learn about tones and Chinese pronunciation. And with that being said, we've now reached the top, and oh, it's beautiful. So that is Buena Vista Park, which is the oldest park in the whole city of San Francisco. And the view in that direction is just absolutely spectacular. And so I think now I'm just gonna take 5 minutes to just breathe that in. All right, so here we are. I just love how dramatically this city sort of turns its pages as you sort of flip through and travel really short distances. I live just like a mile over there or something, and now, here we are at the treetops of San Francisco, overlooking the Golden Gate Bridge, and I love it. So I want to summarize the points of this video and have a little bit of final discussion. So I think let's just go home. Let's go home, make a cup of coffee, and I'll see you there. Okay, so here we are back at home. I've got my coffee. Let's just sort of summarize and talk about my personal solution. So I do think that tones seem to be certainly one of the most intimidating aspects of learning Chinese, and maybe they are one of the more difficult elements of learning this language. But I don't think that means that we have to treat them so differently. So I think that this very common practice of from day one starting with trying to master the tones and sitting in a classroom or sitting at home going just ma, 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 right? And then every word you learn, you sit there and focus on, okay, so it's first tone or it's second tone or it's third tone. As you saw, I haven't even really memorized very well which tone corresponds to which actual sound yet. I certainly am not thinking about that constantly every time I try to speak Chinese. I think the better approach is to get your feet wet. Instead of jumping into the deep end, and just like worrying about all these tones all the time, I think that what will happen if you do that is that when you try to speak Chinese, it's going to be so overwhelming. Because on one hand, you're already trying to worry about the grammatical structures, which happens in every language, right? So you're sitting there trying to think, what is it, subject, like it's a 我的中文, and then 老师, right? So you're worrying about the grammar, you're trying to find the words, right? So you're like, what was teacher? 老师. And on top of all of this stuff that exists in every other language that makes it difficult to speak, I think that what happens is you'll end up being very, very robotic, because you're going to start to try to say every tone exactly as it's supposed to be. So you'll be like 我很好 instead of 我很好, right? So, and again, maybe I'm not exactly accurate, but the point is that I think you're much better off. Just try to copy, just trust your ears. Really, really try to trust your ears, and most importantly, open your mouth. And I always say this with every language. If you sit there and study French in silence, if you study Japanese in silence, if you study Spanish in silence, it doesn't matter. When you go to speak, you're not going to be able to, right? Because you're not practicing. You have to open your mouth. And so I think this is true for every language. I remember with the French R, that it's just like, I said it 1,000 times. I was studying Babel, I was doing Asimil, whatever it was, and I was constantly repeating out loud and getting better and better with that. Merci, merci. Ah, c'est gentil, merci. Like this, right? And so I think it's the same for all languages, but especially with tonal languages like Chinese, I think that just constantly repeating out loud, constantly trusting your ears, and simply trying to sort of embrace the musicality of the language. And so again, to use that same sentence I've been saying all episode, it could be wrong. I didn't practice it for this purpose. It just came to my mind on that walk. 我的中文老师是英国人. Okay, so again, I remember that there's this ren, this rise on that final word for person, right? But I'm not thinking, is it fourth tone? Is it third, second? I just think, oh yeah, like ren has a rise. 英国人, right? Ying starts kind of high. I don't think about which tone it is. I just think, oh yeah, 英国人, 老师. Like, so that's kind of it, right? I remember the word like 公司, like, or that sentence I gave you last time, right? Like, 我的妈妈在公园运动. I remember 公园运动, right? So it's the rhythm, the musicality. That's what I'm paying attention to, and I don't worry so much if I get it wrong. And I think that a wonderful byproduct of that carefree, get your feet wet, try your best, get some foundational knowledge in some linguistic context. I think while doing that, you actually end up being quite accurate. So then you're going to have more confidence and more context when you finally start to try to learn those rules and really master the tones. And so that's where I think I am now. I think I'm in a really good place where now it makes sense for me to actually study the tones and actually try to learn what are the rules here. Why is it that it's not ni hao, it's ni hao? Why? And when I learn the rule, I'll be able to say, oh, that's right. That makes sense now. Because I have the context. I can really assimilate that knowledge and then try to use it when I speak Chinese, right? So that's my current stage. I'm really excited. So we'll see. Hopefully my tones will get better. And I'm going to be also continuing to sort of work on my narrative that we talked about in episode 5. And perhaps next week, I'll give you some demonstration on my Chinese narrative. So, cheers, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.